Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The $4 trillion Australian superannuation system is overall, I think, a success. It covers around 90% of workers, allowing them to plan for financial independence in their retirement, makes financial capital available for large-scale investment in Australian infrastructure and enterprise, and reduces some of the costs of age pensions for taxpayers. The better the superannuation system, the less we need to draw down for the age pension. So, looking after workers is the right thing to do, and effective super policy does make good economic sense. Notwithstanding this success, many constituents over the years have approached me because they have not been paid their superannuation entitlements. In fact, it actually has shocked me over the years, the people who have approached me, and it's been very, very difficult for them, particularly if they're still with that employer, to raise this issue. And they're not alone. According to Super Members Council, unpaid super is costing working Australians $110 million a week. In 2021-2022, 2.8 million Australians missed out on $5.1 billion in superannuation entitlements. The Super Members Council's latest figures show unpaid super has grown to $5.7 billion a year. This affects more men than women, as they work in industries and occupations with higher rates of underpayment and on average make more income than women. But the impact on women is often more acute, as they often have lower super balances going into retirement. Blue-collar workers in construction, trades and transport are most likely to miss out, and certainly I've heard from many mechanics and those working in factories in my community that have experienced this, with 41% of labourers experiencing unpaid super and other industries which experience higher rates of business insolvencies, where unpaid super is more common. Retail, trade and accommodation, food services have also been found by the ATO to be of high risk in recent years. The average worker will miss out on around $26,000 in super for women and $36,000 for men at retirement due to the effects of unpaid super and that compounding loss over time. My electorate of Mayo has been actually one of the worst experienced communities for this, with the highest average underpayment of any South Australian electorate, and totalling $33 million in superannuation debt. That's affecting over 19,500 workers, an average underpayment of more than $1,600, in fact $1,690 per person. Unpaid super allows non-compliant businesses to compete on an uneven playing field with those who pay their workers' entitlements and indeed pay them on time. This bill will require employers to meet key obligations, to accurately calculate employers' individual superannuation guarantee and the quantifying earnings, make contributions before the end of the 7th business day after payment of those earnings and 14 days for a new employee, and comply with the employer's choice of fund. These reforms will go some way to protect employees by ensuring superannuation is paid in real time and not months later, or indeed perhaps not at all. It will reduce the unpaid debts that accumulate before some employers collapse or restructure, and empower the Australian Taxation Office to assess and recover unpaid superannuation more promptly, and hold directors accountable through stronger penalties for systematic non-compliance. I think it must be said that the vast majority of employers in Australia do the right thing, and I think overwhelmingly nearly every employer in Australia does want to do the right thing. It is going to make a big difference to workers like my constituent Catherine in the future. Earlier this year, Catherine's employer terminated her employment and that of several of her colleagues. They were told by the business that while it was not currently able to pay their entitlements, they would be paid in full. After weeks of seeking payment of their entitlements, Catherine and her former colleagues contacted the Fair Work Ombudsman. Their former employee advised the Ombudsman they would be paid within the week, but they were not. They made complaints to the Australian Taxation Office regarding their unpaid wages and superannuation owed. Catherine is trying to maintain hope, but they remain in limbo as the former employer, which is an NDIS registered provider, still continues to trade but says that it lacks the funds to pay their entitlements. with the passage of this Payday Superannuation Bill, it will be much harder for Catherine's former employer or others like it to get into this situation in the first place. Employers will not be allowed to accumulate a superannuation debt under the radar because they will be required to pay within those 7 days after their payday, rather than quarterly. Employees and, importantly, the ATO will become aware sooner if superannuation payments are not being paid into their fund. There have been concerns raised that employers may not have enough time to deploy and test and implement changes pre-commencement of this Act, particularly system changes. Now, I absolutely appreciate that the timeline is tight. 8 months from passage to commencement, and some challenges may remain that need to be addressed. And I absolutely have sympathy for some businesses, and particularly small businesses, who are worried about this additional compliance burden. We know that this has been coming for some time. It was certainly flagged in the 2023-2024 budget. And it must be said that workers have been waiting at a cost to them of collectively over $5 billion a year in unpaid super. And I must feel that that issue, that loss, must be addressed. I understand that the ATO's first-year compliance approach will allow some leniency during this initial period for low to medium risk employers who are genuinely trying to make efforts to comply, and I'm keen that this is genuinely the case. For too long I have been raising concerns about unpaid superannuation. In fact, in 2017 in this place I introduced a private member's bill called Fair Work Amendment Recovering Unpaid Superannuation. My bill would have improved notification requirements of payment or indeed non-payment for employers and superannuation funds, and included superannuation with the national employment standards, providing more avenues for employees to pursue their unpaid superannuation debts. And this bill contains other measures. That bill contained other measures including the ability for employers to claim salary sacrificing super as if they were employer superannuation contributions, and we needed to get that removed, and an exemption allowing employers not to make superannuation contributions to employees when they earn less than $450 in wages each month. And I'm glad that those issues have been addressed. I think it's really important that we provide employees with every avenue they can to try and recover their super. And certainly in my experience, when I've seen the notifications from employees who have tried to use the ATO to recover funds, it has not always been very successful. And so I think it's very important that we look to have inclusion of superannuation in the National Employment Standards, and this would mean that most employees would have that access rather than just relying on the ATO to do that debt recovery. I remember seeing one form back from the ATO where a constituent was owed, I think, several $1,000s worth. The ATO recovered something like $2.50. It was some absolutely nominal amount, and then it said, we've made a recovery and we're closing the case. So we need to have a much, much better system, and perhaps that's more people working in the ATO on this issue of superannuation getting those debt recovery, which is what it is. But it certainly makes it very, very difficult. I've heard from apprentice hairdressers. I've heard from hairdressers who are qualified hairdressers and been in the industry for a long time. I've heard from mechanics. I've heard from people who work in retail. And in some cases, they've been working at businesses that in my community are very, very well-known businesses. And it has certainly shocked me, the level of unpaid superannuation that exists in our nation. In 2020-21, only 17%, or under $1 billion of unpaid superannuation guarantee entitlements were recovered, just 17% of a $4.7 billion total unpaid super. And the 2022 Australian National Audit Office report into superannuation guarantee non-compliance found the ATO's use of the framework was only partially effective. While 9,594 fines were issued in the 2021 period by the ATO, only 43% of them required a business to pay a penalty above the unpaid amount, and less than 1% were given the maximum 200% penalty. And the burden of reporting remains with workers, who report 78% of recoveries, with automated detection of the ATO remaining very, very low. We need prompt and proactive compliance. Recovery action really is the best chance for people to get that super back into their balance, because we need that interest to compound. Further work will be needed in future on recovery of entitlements for workers in cases where there's business insolvency. Super entitlements are usually last in line after wages and business debts, certainly well behind secured debts, with ASIC data showing that in 2022-2023, 15% of insolvency cases involved unpaid wages, but in 45% of cases involved unpaid superannuation. And just this week, the Sydney Morning Herald had reported that 200 workers for a disability provider will be missing out on their unpaid super following the company's collapse. It is reported that 174 staff are due a total of $264,000 in unpaid superannuation contributions, with the company having 74 unsecured creditors owing $330,000 and a net bank balance of $3,000. While unpaid wages can be claimed under the Fair Entitlements Guarantee Australian Government Compensation Scheme of Last Resort, along with leave and redundancy pay in cases of business insolvency, the Fair Entitlements Guarantee does not at present cover superannuation, and I think that it really should, so that in cases such as these disability workers will be looked after by the FEG in terms of their superannuation entitlements. And it sends a very clear message that superannuation is as important as wages. I call on the government to take that next step and to consider amending the Fair Entitlements Guarantee to include superannuation guarantee contributions aligned with the ability to claim unpaid wages. I understand how businesses can get behind. Wages and super are some of the largest expenses that businesses experience. But we need to ensure so that we have that these are entitlements that workers are absolutely entitled to have. This is part of their salary and it must be paid, and that is the long and short of it. I want this bill to succeed, to prevent more of my constituents being blindsided by unpaid superannuation, and often it's a year or so until they realise that they're not getting paid superannuation, just like my constituent Catherine. I don't want to hear from more employees who have struggling, particularly those who haven't been able to find other work, who are still in that workplace and having to have those very difficult conversations with their employers about why their superannuation hasn't been paid. Thank you. I commend the bill to the House.